All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming down today. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida, through the generous support of the Knight Foundation. And this afternoon, Books and Books, in collaboration with the Creative Writing Department at FIU and the Writers on the Bay Reading Series, is thrilled to be presenting another FIU alumni reading. Our host this afternoon will be our friend Julie Marie Wade. But before we bring her up, here to introduce Julie, please welcome to the podium the director of the Creative Writing Program at FIU and a great friend of Books and Books, Mr. Les Standiford. I'll try turning that up a little.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. This is, along with the season-ending event, my favorite program. The season-ending event is always a Student Literary Awards program, which shows promise, gives you a glimpse of the literary future, as I like to say. And now you're at the event that shows you that the future has arrived. It really is heartening. I know I speak on behalf of all my fellow faculty members to see this kind of success. There's one sure way to measure the success of a creative writing program, as far as I'm concerned, and that's with results. And geez, do we have them? And you're going to see, hear some of those results today. We're up over 100 books now published by our alums since the program began granting degrees 25 years ago. And I think the faculty between them probably aren't very far behind that number. It's great to be a part of it. Those who can teach, as I like to say. And obviously the students are listening because we've got a remarkable record. I look forward to what we have. And speaking of accomplishments, Julie made it back just in time from New York City. Well, it was last week, really, but she won't mind if I exaggerate a little bit, where she was celebrating the launch of her new collection, Six. She read in Manhattan, she read in Brooklyn, and now she's deigned to be with us here this afternoon, and I'll turn it over to Julie. Congratulations.
All right, everyone. This is also one of my favorite events of the year. I have the pleasure of introducing all of today's readers. Sadly, two of the readers who are in your program are not able to be here today. So we'll have our readers come up in alphabetical order. I will introduce all of them. The two readers who will not be present, but whose books are present, are MJ Fiev, so you can still buy her book, and Lynn Milner, you can still buy her book. We're very sorry that they can't join us, but we do have 8 fabulous readers for you. And after the reading is over, there will be a reception in the courtyard, and the authors who have books here will be happy, I'm sure, to sign them for you. So without further ado, our first reader will be Kathleen Chambliss, who is a poet from Miami, Florida, as well as a visual artist and activist. She facilitates popular education-based anti-oppression workshops with Miami's grassroots organization Seed 305. Her work has appeared in the Electronic Encyclopedia of Experimental Literature, Fjords Review, Grief Diaries, Highlight Magazine, Literary Orphans, and Storm Cycle 2014 and 2015. She also co-authors a queer feminist zine called Fallacies. And Necromantic, which she'll be reading from today, is her first book. Please welcome Kathleen Chambliss.
Hi, thank you, Julie. Just really quick, I'd like to thank Les Standiford for this awesome program. 100 books in 25 years, wow, that's really, really impressive. And thank you, Denise and Campbell, because this book would not have happened without them. Okay. This one's called Lapsed. A forearm's kiss of indigo, indignant snake restraint. Peeled baby black plastic purses, sprinkle, sprinkle, splatter, toxic matter. Twinkle, twinkle, teaspoon star. Bubbled amber, glittered fizzle. A syringe sucking, sucking, gushing, a violation of the heart. Crimson burst, birth from ventricles to a vial. Morse code black, tap, tap, dash, numerals glass, pupils pin, eyelid slip, XO, XO, I loved you so. This one is called For a Minute There, I Thought We Could Have Been Happy. In a trailer park in a desert, Lassie met her first coyote. The coyote bowed down to her, his ears perked up and bushy tail wagging. She looked in his eyes and saw how they were silver with glimmers of honey. She couldn't help but curtsy and give him a playful bark as if to say, I dig you too, my dear. He gave her a smile full of fangs so sexy. I dare you to follow me. He dashed off into the ravine and she sprung after him. She got to the bottom where he disappeared into a forest of prickly pear cacti, their fuchsia bulbs glowing like Chinese paper lanterns. The sunlight was so bright that she could only see by squinting. Suddenly, she was slammed on her back, 4 coyotes ripping out her entrails and laughing, dragging her innards through the sand, snagging on the spines of the cactus branches. Coyotes only pretend to play like other dogs when they're starving. This one is called On Dying Alone. Dying alone, alone with a cat with a witch, an old witch, alone with a cat. I will be that lady, the old lady without kids, except the kids in the neighborhood. The kids in the neighborhood, afraid of me. Me? I will be a dare, a double doggy dare on Halloween. On Halloween, I double doggy dare you to ring my doorbell. Ring, not on these fingers. These fingers made this house blacked out except for a candle in the attic window. The attic window, a red light to throw everyone off. Adults think I turn tricks with those treats. What a treat, to be that old puta bruja sucia. A puta bruja sucia with a shotgun and a rocking chair on her stoop. On my stoop with my cat, I purr, a purr to welcome the end of everything. And then this one will be my last one. It's called Pick a Card. We practice Egyptian fairy voodoo with kisses beneath the eclipsed blood moon and mouthfuls of hieroglyphic birthday cake on the roof. We painted the sky with frosting, and that's why the clouds are blue. Let's play with pyromancy, hydromancy, aeromancy, geomancy, necromancy. Let's brush up on your divination. Pick a card, but not any card. Pick the one that pulls your fingertips like the metal of the bridle in a horse's mouth. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Our second reader is Mike Creedon. Mike Creedon's work has appeared in Tiger Tail, Miami Living, Everything is Broken, the Florida Book Review, and Trouble in the Heartland, crime fiction inspired by the songs of Bruce Springsteen. He is a senior instructor in the Writing and Rhetoric program at FIU, and the book launch for his first novel, All Your Lies Came True, will be here at Books and Books in just 6 days, next Saturday. Please welcome Mike Creedon.
Hey everyone, thanks. Thank you, Julie. And thanks to my teachers and mentors who are all here on a Sunday afternoon, a sunny afternoon. Lynn Barrett, Les Standiford, John Dufresne, Denise Duhamel. Without you guys, I wouldn't have this book in my hand. So thanks. I'm just going to read a short excerpt from the beginning of chapter 2. The Guy I Was Last Night, Aphrodite Unhinged, wasn't the biggest hit off Night of the Living Dread, the band's multi-platinum second album, but it was my favorite song, and I think it was the favorite song of a certain kind of fan. It was a diary entry soaked in booze and self-loathing about the protagonist's latest romantic disappointment, an innocent woman who unknowingly becomes the embodiment of his fantasies. As the vision gets darker and angrier, so does the music, growing from murmur to all-out howl, muted bass guitar tones building into a ringing, descending chord progression. Then Randall starts to sing softly variations on the phrase, "The guy I was last night." I knew it would take me at least an hour to get back into my silly article after Art had distracted me, so I pulled up the video clip online. The clip starts with Tyler and Randall running out of a club. Judging by their apparel, it's a club they just played. through throngs of screaming fans and into the back of a waiting limo. They climb into opposite corners of the back seat, leaving the middle space open. The limo door closes, muting the screams. Tyler is the video's protagonist, and his expression implies that he's already starting to doubt if what happened was real. As the music starts, a gorgeous woman appears in the seat between Tyler and Randall. She has dark features, blonde hair, deep, expressive blue eyes, which at that point are the most colorful things in the video. As the first begins detailing the hero's exploits of the night before when he was drunk and on stage, the woman looks enthralled, but as the lyrics grow darker and more self-pitying, her expression moves from boredom to anger and finally to disgust. In the seat beside her, Tyler morphs from handsome mid-20s rock star to pot-bellied and skinny middle-aged drunk, and finally to fat and jowly old man. Of course, he blames the woman for not loving him through all his magnificent flaws, and he refers to her during the song's brilliant middle eight as Aphrodite Unhinged. Tyler's part was so great that most hardcore fans referred to the song by its parenthetical title. The song flips the classic soft verse, loud chorus song structure that Nirvana stole from the Pixies. During the raucous verses, the woman rants at Tyler with mouth-twisted, bug-eyed, tight-fisted rage, while Randall looks on with amusement. Tyler sits with his head back and his sunglasses on, looking catatonic and out of it. During the soft, melodic chorus, the point of view shifts to that of the limo driver, who watches with clear envy in his eyes as the two rock demigods attempt to flirt with and seduce this woman. Feature articles about the band often played off the dynamic of Tyler as drunken man-child and Randall as the controlling adult who made the band work. The woman stares straight ahead at the traffic on the streets and the sparkling city lights. After the third verse, Tyler's angry pentatonic lead kicks in, fired by a thunderous, freewheeling drum part that sounds like Keith Moon throwing a drunk down 3 flights of stairs. The song ends with an anguished scream, second only to John Lennon's tormented wail on Cold Turkey. It was a devious move for Art to bring up this band. Power Trash was the touchstone for Stevie and me. They were the band we modeled ourselves after. I watched the video 10 times after Art left, each time dwelling on some morbid memory, some failure, and occasionally some fantasy of the life I was certain we would have. I had a major crush on the woman in the video. I used to have a tape that I made off MTV, back when MTV still played videos, before modern technology let you rewatch what you loved without even making the effort of rewind. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Our third reader will be Jason Elan. Jason was born and raised on the Jersey Shore, but moved to Miami Beach in 1999. He's moved away a few times, but always comes back. His work has been published in The Battered Suitcase and Everything is Broken Too, and is forthcoming on Akashic Books' Mondays Are Murder web series. He teaches in the Global First Year program at FIU. Please welcome Jason Elan.
Sorry, I'm a little short for the microphone. I'm going to read a flash fiction piece that's getting published tomorrow on Akashic Books, Mondays Are Murder web series. So if I mumble, you can go tomorrow and check out what you missed. The rules for that web series are it has to be 750 words or less. It has to be in a set in a specific location, and somebody's got to die. Bogota is shrouded in gray. Gray clouds, gray streets, gray rain. Danny had expected something more tropical, not a city on top of a mountain year-round early fall. He didn't know the name of the street that he was walking down. Steep, curved, narrow, the sidewalk slab unevenly laid, the curb practically knee-high. Luz, the woman walking on his left, guided him, one hand gently touching his elbow, the other pointing out the ridges of mislaid cement. Her black hair coiled around her shoulders, a single strand plastered to her cheek by the rain. Danny reached down, brushed it aside. She had approached him in a pub in Zonate, a university student who wanted to practice her English. For an hour or so, they talked and drank. Danny had 3, maybe 4 whiskeys. Luz, a local beer in a brown bottle. Then she checked her watch and suggested they go back to her apartment a short walk away. It was quieter there, she said, easier to practice. Going home with the beautiful Colombian was exactly what Danny had in mind when he booked the trip. what he was thinking about during the conversation with the soon-to-be ex-wife, Colleen, as she asked him where he was going and why he couldn't pick up their son from basketball practice that weekend. The accusation in her tone clear, still a deadbeat. Danny had told her, "You don't get to ask me that anymore," and hung up. Spent an hour pacing around the studio apartment. Boxes of clothes still piled in the corner 3 weeks after the move. Waited for his son to call back so Danny could tell him that he was going to Colombia, home of Pablo Escobar. Cool, huh? Anything to restore the luster of a loser father who had been out of work for most of the last 3 years, and finally, after thousands of sent resumes, had come across a good job with a good salary, only to be told by the wife that she'd fallen in love with someone else. She was just waiting for him to find work to tell him. This trip was his reboot, a chance to feel like a man again, to meet a beautiful woman, maybe one ready to leave behind her developing country and move someplace more stable. Danny looked down at Luz, her long black hair, her cautious steps, her wide smile. He could help her move up in this world, and she could help him get his self-respect back. Luz told him they were almost to her apartment, but the security was strict in her building. She asked if he had his passport with him and a second form of ID, something that the guards could check. He pulled his passport from his jacket pocket with one hand, his wallet from his back pocket with the other, waved them in the air. Luz's eyes widened and she stepped closer to him, pressed his hands against her chest, leaned against him with her hip. "Don't show them in public like that. There are many thieves in this city," she said. Danny felt the softness of her breasts against the back of his hands and the hardness of her hip against his thigh. He barely registered her taking the passport and wallet from his hands and putting them in her purse. He just didn't want her to pull away. They started down the hill again, her hand still on his elbow, making her way slowly on her heels. Behind them, the sigh of brakes from an ancient bus waiting at a traffic light. Luz looked over her shoulder and then up at Danny, smiled. The revving of an engine and grinding of gears. Danny leaned down with his mouth open, wanting to kiss her right there in the rain. She pulled away. "Patience," she said. Danny turned and saw the bus gathering speed as it came around the bend, the side practically scraping the curb. In the front left corner of the window, a green and white placard, Chapinero, Unicentro, K7C68. The driver nodded his head at them. How polite, Danny thought, so different from the bus drivers in the U.S. Then he felt Luz's hip on his, not gently, but with unexpected force, and he pitched forward off the impossibly high curb, arms askew, face turned to the oncoming bus. Gray rain falling across headlights.
Thank you, Jason. Our fourth reader will be Fabienne Josephat, who is the author of Dancing in the Baron's Shadow, a debut novel recently mentioned in the Roots list of books by Black authors to look out for in 2016. Fabi's fiction, nonfiction, and poetry have been featured in The Master's Review, Grist Journal, Damselfly, Hinches de Poesia, Off the Coast Journal, and The Caribbean Writer, as well as 8 Miami Poets, a Highlight Books poetry anthology. She lives in Miami. Welcome, Fabi.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's funny, I was sad to leave the program at FIU, but it's nice to know that I can come back and see the people I miss so much. I'm going to read a little excerpt from the novel, and all you need to know is that this is the part where Raymond, who's a hero here, is with his sister-in-law, and they're at a prison begging for Raymond's brother's release. Raymond's brother's name is Nicholas. And this is Haiti, 1965. Raymond couldn't figure out what it was about Adjudant Joseph that made him uneasy. Although he looked young and strong, he nonetheless struck Raymond as a man who did very little work in his life. When they walked in, Adjudant Joseph was sitting back in his chair laughing on the telephone with his feet up on the desk. He and Eve stood together before him awkwardly, wondering whether to sit or stand. The officer made no sign of acknowledgement, just continued his conversation as if he were alone. "Don't worry, my friend," Adjudant Joseph said, his eyes wandering over the view out his window. "I've got you covered. Bill me by head count. I'm good for it." Raymond considered his perfectly manicured nails, his starched collar, and his freshly shined boots. "You know me. I like things quiet. No need to worry." Finally, Adjudant Joseph caught a glimpse of Eve. He undressed her with his eyes, tracking the contours of her figure, lingering on her chest and her hips, Eve switched her daughter to her other hip as if to remind him of the other realities attached to her body. After 10 more minutes of cryptic conversation, he hung up and rested his hands on the desk, fingers interlaced. How can I help you? Raymond swallowed with difficulty, and before he could even open his mouth, Eve spoke up. Adjutant, please, I'm here to beg for any information you may have on my husband. He was taken in the middle of the night from his home in Tuju. They said they were bringing him here. We deserve to know on what grounds he's being held. Grounds? Yes, Eve said, please, he's innocent, and what has he done? He hasn't harmed anyone. Madame, if he was arrested, surely there must be a reason, the officer said, his eyes flirtatious, his tone coy, as if this were a pickup line in a nightclub. His name is Nicolas Léveillé, Raymond cut in. He's my brother, a good man, a father. Adjutant Joseph looked over in irritation and noticed Raymond standing there for the first time. He shook his head in contempt. I don't recall. If you look at your files, you'll see, Raymond said, digging through his pockets. He was probably brought here this morning early at dawn. Adjutant, please. We were told you were powerful, that you could help us. You're a good man. That's what Georges Fenici said. He said, you call the shots around here. Raymond pulled out the roll of gourd that George had given him. He'd added his own cash to the pile on the drive over. His bills were dirty and stuck together, and he hid them under George's crisp new ones. He knew the officer was watching him. His hands trembled slightly as he folded up the money into a wad and held it out. Will you help us? Raymond asked. Adjutant Joseph stared at the money for a moment, then glanced at the door. He reached for the bills and took them, counting the money before stuffing it in his pocket. And then he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. He flipped through the papers. For a moment, all was still except for the sound of his fingers made as he skimmed through the files. Raymond glanced over at Eve, but she didn't look at him. Biting her lip, she reached for the gold medallion around her neck, a heart with an embossed portrait of the Virgin Mary, and she held it against her lips. Léveillé, yes. Adjutant Joseph ran his finger over the black lettering. Raymond could see an official stamp on the header, the familiar effigy of palm trees and bayonets, and a signature scribbled at the bottom of the page. Ah, yes, I remember now. He was brought here on very serious charges. Treason. Treason? Eve shook her head. Her black curls bounced with movement. She cradled her daughter. My husband is no traitor. He's a good man, a citizen. He's a professor. He's well respected. He didn't commit any crime. Adjutant, we will forever be in your debt if you could help us, Raymond said. I can chauffeur you anytime you want, anywhere you like. You name it, I'm your man. No one knows Port-au-Prince like I do. I'm a good cabbie. Adjutant Joseph silenced Raymond with a crude gesture. Eve fell into the chair behind her. Can I see him? Eve ventured. I just want to hear his voice. Adjutant Joseph grabbed his phone again, dialed a number. Raymond's lips moved in silent prayer, but every word was hollow in his heart. Prayer meant nothing since he'd already lost his own family. Adjutant Joseph waited on the line. His eye wandered lazily back to Eve, who was still seated, exhausted. Raymond reached for her hand. We've made a mistake, he thought. We've walked into the lion's den, stupidly claiming attachment to a prisoner who's been arrested for treason. And yet, beyond this office, there were cells and locked doors, and Nicholas might be behind one of them. Raymond hoped to at least see him, speak to him, try to come up with a plan before he was transferred to Fort Dimanche. Raymond knew he would do anything in his power to free his younger brother. Yes, Nicolas Léveillé, case number 203-786, scheduled for Fort Dimanche. Has the truck left yet? Raymond saw Eve sit up, her hand over her mouth to stifle a cry. Adjutant Joseph listened, nodded, and then he grunted. Oui, merci. Then he hung up. He stared at Eve and Raymond. He's already been transferred to Fort Dimanche. There's nothing I can do. Oh, no. Eve moaned in her chair before dropping her head in despair. Raymond stepped closer to the desk, cautious to not touch anything. There must be something you can do. The officer was watching Eve wipe tears from her eyes. Raymond noticed a sly smile forming on his lips. Amélie, unhappy with her mother's tears, began to wail. You know, it's such a funny coincidence, the adjutant said, brightening suddenly. I was once a student of your husband's. He nodded eagerly at Eve, whose eyes widened with fear. Raymond glared in disgust at how the man was playing them. His anger was nearly blinding, and he imagined smashing his fist repeatedly into his face. Yes, Adjutant Joseph went on, and would you believe that my brother Philippe is, or should I say was, attending a lecture course by Maître Léveillé this very term, so you see, we have a lot in common. Raymond and Eve gaped at the young man. Perhaps, he drawled, shifting in his chair, there is another way. Perhaps if Madame would care to add something extra to the package, I might be able to do something to help. After all, perhaps I could arrange a private visit in Fort Dimanche. Eve stared in horror. Raymond trembled in anger. He spun on his heel, grabbed the child from Eve, and gestured for her to stand up. Pardon? Eve began, her eyes widening. Do you not understand that I'm here for my husband? I'm a married woman. How dare you? Raymond took her by the wrist, pulled her up gently, and moved them both quickly toward the door. My husband is not a criminal, she shouted. Merci, Wanajida, Raymond mumbled, nodding with false gratitude. You've been most kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabi. Our next reader will be Louis Lowy. A former firefighter, Louis K. Lowy is the recipient of a State of Florida Individual Artist Fellowship. His work has appeared in New Plains Review, the MacGuffin Magazine, the Chafee Review, and the anthology Everything is Broken. His poem, Poetry Workshop, Mary Had a Little Lamb, was the runner-up in the 2009 Winning Writers Wurgle Flomp Humor Poetry Contest. His first novel, Die Laughing, a humorously dark sci-fi adventure set in the 1950s, was published in 2011. Petal, his current novel, tells the story of Joanne Brick, a 49-year-old music teacher who loses her job and struggles to reclaim her life through bicycle racing. And To Dream, book 1 of his science fiction drama Anatomy of a Hue Machine, is scheduled for release later this year. Please welcome Louis.
Thank you. I'd like to take a moment to not only thank the creative writing department, but I'd also like to thank the English department, who gave me the literary background skills to be able to apply all the wonderful things I learned in the writing department. So actually, the book is Anatomy of a Hue Machine is going to be released in January of 2017. So I thought that I would read about that, read from that. The book centers around 4 characters: an artificial intelligence named J1 struggling to find his humanity, the scientist who created him in the image of her dead 17-year-old son, Jay, the ruthless head of the corporation who owns J1, and the leader of a rebel force who is seeking revenge for the destruction of her planet. The chapter I'm going to read is really, really short. I chose it because it's the seed from which the entire novel grows. In this chapter, the scientist, Nyati Bopari, who I actually introduced in Petal, is awaiting the arrival of 2 security agents assigned to pick up J1 and deliver him to corporate headquarters so they can activate him and begin production on others like him. Date 2030, West Redlands, Florida, Amera Inc. Research and Development, Robotics Division. Nyati stared hard at the photo of her son Jay, at his chestnut eyes and dark sweet tea-colored skin. Nyati touched her forearm. His skin was hers. Jay's hair was also like hers, black, shiny, and full. A lock of it cascaded, as it nearly always did, just below his left eyebrow. She slid her forefinger along the lock as if she could brush it back. His high school graduation mortar cap was angled proudly on his head. He had the strong, straight nose of a leading man and the sincere, full-lipped smile of a leader. So much potential, she said. Nyati studied the angel white graduation gown cascading down his slim torso. In the picture, Jay's right arm was slung around Nyati, who was grinning proudly. I want to make a difference, Mom, he had said to her just before her husband, Palab, snapped the photo outside on the auditorium lawn after the ceremony. That was 8 years ago, when Jay was 17, she was 37, Palab was still her husband, and they were still a family. Jay, she whispered. In her memory, a horn blared, and she remembered it all again. A red pickup with a firefighter sticker on its windshield smashed into her passenger side mirror. In her ears, she heard Palab scream, Mother Chod! Jay's graduation cap ripped from his hand and jabbed her below the eye. Her calf ached from stomping on the brakes. The tendons in her fingers burnt from clutching the steering wheel with all her strength. The crackle of glass and fiberglass and the crunch of metal drowned out everything. Then, nothing. No Jay, and 8 months later, a divorce decree and no Palab. All she had left was a heart-shaped locket with Jay's ashes and a desire to work forever. She wanted a cigarette. Niati glanced at J1. He was in a corner of the room, slumped dormant on a stool. A marketing exec at Amera Inc. had long ago dubbed him the Hugh Machine and attached the crass tagline, "Beyond machine, practically human." She was glad she had stuck to her guns to have it made in the exact image of Jay. Corporate had fought like hell for it to be androgynous, to appeal to as many consumers as possible, they had argued. But she had won. They had known she was the leading expert in, among other things, quark circuits and gene fluidology, which was the science of biocore fluid and its relation to DNA. More importantly, they understood that without her, the project would never succeed. She noticed a separation in the seam of J1's shirt. Niati opened her bottom desk drawer and removed a small sewing kit. She mended the tear, brushed back a tuft of hair that had fallen over his left brow, glanced to make sure his collar was on straight, and returned to her desk. Niati looked again at the photo. She wondered what her life would have been like had she pursued her hobby of dressmaking instead of science. Her eyes welled up, and she turned Jay's picture face down. Niati slipped the sewing kit back in the bottom drawer and removed her personal touch slate. She pressed in her password. As the slate screen lit up, she rose from the desk, approached J1, and thought, God help me for what I'm about to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Our next reader is Rita Maria Martinez, who is a writing consultant for NSU and an independent reading and writing tutor. She's been a featured author at Miami Book Fair International, the Society of the Four Arts in Palm Beach, and the Palabapura reading series sponsored by the Guild Literary Complex in Chicago. Her poetry has appeared in Notre Dame Review, Plowshares, Two River View, the 8th edition textbook of 3 genres, the writing of fiction, literary nonfiction, poetry, and drama, and in the anthology Burnt Sugar, Caña Quemada, Contemporary Cuban Poetry in English and Spanish. Her chapbook, Jane in the Box, was published in 2008 by March Street Press, and her first full-length collection of poetry, The Jane and Bertha in Me, was published in January of this year by Aldrich Press. The Jane and Bertha in Me was also a semifinalist for the WordWorks Washington Prize and a finalist for the Andre Montoya Poetry Prize. Please welcome Rita.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be celebrating FIU authors and Bronte 200 with everyone, because this year marks the bicentennial of Charlotte Bronte's birth. And I love all things Jane Eyre. So if you've heard maybe of some mashup books, like, I haven't read it, but Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Okay. Well, there's one called Jane Slayer, where the author, Sherry Irwin, turns Jane Eyre into a vampire killer. Kind of like that TV show Buffy, sort of like that. So this poem is called Reading Jane Slayer. After reading Jane Eyre, I fell in love with Jane Slayer, the tiny female Van Helsing-like avenger who eradicates unruly members of the undead. A vocation confirmed when John Reed tries to gobble the destitute orphan like a little Debbie snack cake. I admire Jane's ingenuity and foresight, hours employed gathering and sharpening wood, stakes always up her sleeve or stowed beneath her skirt in case VSP, vampiric sensory perception, kicks in. I admire the quick draw, nimble fingers unsheathing Egyptian daggers, a beloved keepsake from Miss Temple for severing zombie heads, despite the inevitable aftermath of green goo that will coat Jane's pinafore and stockings like nuclear waste. Reader, I found myself rooting for a literary smackdown between the blood-sucking Blanche and the jaguarish Jane. I wanted what countless women have wanted, to cheer and do the wave as Jane drives a stake through her rival's shriveled heart. Miss Ingram, the unrepentant socialite guilty of precipitating her own demise, of prematurely turning into a pile of dust at Jane's feet, the penalty exacted for chomping on little Adele's thighs like a pair of KFC drumsticks. So, growing up, I used to watch, like, on Sundays, those old Tarzan movies in black and white with, my favorite Tarzan was Johnny Weissmuller, yeah. So, and then I used to watch him a lot with my dad. I don't know if he fancied himself like a Tarzan, but whatever. That would be another poem, and I'm not sure I want to write that one. But, so this one, I included an epigraph from a novel called White Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, it's considered a prequel to Jane Eyre. It tells the story about Edward and his wife Bertha, when they got married, their courtship. Jane Eyre thinks of Tarzan's Jane at Canton's, and the epigraph says, his stay in the West Indies has changed him out of all knowledge. He has gray in his hair and misery in his eyes. Jane Eyre thinks of Tarzan's Jane at Canton's. We eat here because it is quick, cheap, and delicious. Underneath the table, your fingers touch the almost nakedness of my sandaled feet. Fried noodles in a bamboo bowl resemble chopped vines, remind me of Sunday afternoons squandered watching old Tarzan flicks while munching on noodles from takeout. Johnny Weissmuller swung fearlessly from vines, bare feet dangling in mid-flight, then traipsing through dirt and mud. Johnny once chased women on the studio lot, sans loincloth. I think of loincloths and love in the treehouse, of Tarzan caressing the soles of Jane's feet the way you caress mine, of Jane wrapping the vines of her legs around the ape-man's waist in the jungle night, as he buries his face in her curly hair, strong as vines and dark as night, as mine, which you tug and often envision billowing underwater. Though I know you're not immersed in the jungle, recreating scenes from Tarzan and his mate. The jungle, that green menace, too much like Jamaica, dusty, reminiscent of sunburns, of feverish nights spent swatting mosquitoes that boldly alighted on your neck. No treehouse for you. Nix the vines. Ditto on the refined Maureen O'Sullivan. I've usually lost you to a concrete jungle, to Splash and Gerald Hanna. When you part my drenched hair and fan each half over a neighboring breast. So the next poem is called At the British Library. I saw the manuscript of Jane Eyre like in the mid-90s. If anyone has plans on going to New York, I encourage it because they have a really nice exhibit going on right now where it's the first time that the MS has visited the United States. At the British Library. Charlotte's manuscript sepulchered like an incorruptible saint, displayed on its back like a woman whose architecture I want to touch, to trace the arc of her earlobes, taste her delicate torso, swallow the goodness spilling from both breasts, from the crevice between her legs, ingest her jutting shoulder blades, drench myself with her rhapsodic scent, trap her long hand beneath the drawbridge of my tongue. And then one last one. This one is called Letter to Edward. Despite popular opinion, I don't hate you. You're not evil, just misguided, too much of a yes man. Marrying for big bucks, not a brilliant career move. Haters trash talk, friends label you a glorified gigolo, allege you turned Bertha into a Stepford wife, then watched in dismay as the Caribbean queen alternated between biting her toes and uprooting clumps of hair when she believed the guy trash's glowing gaze penetrated her pores and scalp, when she swore spirits sent secret messages, Morse code from the great beyond disguised as a series of sneezes or twitches. Communing with the dead came at a high price. Medical bills multiplied. Doctors leeched her temples. The quack who pushed the rescuer catapulted her into a near catatonic state. You wish you didn't despise her. The woman screws anything with a pulse and refuses to floss. You're forever rubbing the spot where your wedding band once resided. In dreams you lather your hand with butter, but the ring refuses to budge. So you surrender the finger to the saw's merciless blade. When your eyelids flutter open at dawn, the digit remains swollen, red, intact. Despite the pathetic attempt at polygamy, I don't hate you. You're no Boy Scout, but you're no Heathcliff either. Cliff is capable of leaning over the roof and dangling Big Bertha by the ankles just for kicks. That SOB is likely to pop bubbly as her skull cracks on cobblestone. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Our penultimate reader is Aline Glenn Moore, or Leanie to her friends, who graduated in spring 2016 and is already contemplating how often she will be able to get away with showing up at Campbell's office hours. While at FIU, Leanie held a John S. and James L. Knight Foundation Fellowship in Poetry and failed on more than one occasion to read her fair share of Gulfstream submissions. She has been a recipient of a residency at the studios of Key West and a scholarship to the New York State Summer Writers Institute. Her work has appeared in Raleigh Review, Brevity, Best New Poets, and elsewhere. And her first chapbook is forthcoming from Green Writers Press in 2017. Leanie lives in an 80-year-old fixer-upper in Fort Lauderdale with her sweet husband Andrew and obstreperous dog Macy. Please welcome Leanie.
Thanks, Julie. Did I write that bio? Yikes. I'm so happy to be here. I think this is a really beautiful tradition that the Creative Writing Department hosts, so thank you. This poem is called Leaving the Galleria dell'Accademia. This is not at all about Michelangelo's David. The unformed figures in the gallery strain against the medium of their design. I think of them while sweaty shop windows glance by, the shapes inside strange as the echoes of the forms of people, or this bus, or the sky gathered and pressed in glass. It is the shapelessness of these moments that inhabits me, makes me want. When I circle my own thoughts, I find no sling at the ready. My eyes do not roll in warning toward anybody's hegemonic Rome. I think he must have loved them, beautiful half abandoned expressions, struggling to articulate their bodies through every level of space, grasping their faces as if stone might truly brook their elemental rage. I think he must have loved them too much to let them rest. This is called Driving the Blue Ridge Parkway Above Asheville. Sorry I'm reading off my phone, by the way, but my printer died 8 months ago, and, so here we are. Driving the Blue Ridge Parkway above Asheville. This is a different kind of deliverance, not from circumstance, but from ourselves. Winter light turns the bare-boned trees into quicksilver. Everything important rises to the top. Ooh, phone. The top. Early leaves, white bone of a deer carcass cresting in a hollow. The river echoes, even in this thin air. Peering through the limbs of the just budded rhododendron, we watch water plunge through the gorge like everything tender and fatal coursing between us now. None of this is spontaneous. It is incessant. It cuts its path. Oh my goodness. Thank you for the high praise. I'm just going to read one more. This is a new poem, I guess, in the spirit of creative community. It's called In Paris. I wanted to tell you that in the gallery looping the obscene pyramidal wound of the Louvre, there is a cafe where I took refuge from either the sun or the rain, both extremes a kind of musculature, an oppression when the season is not right, and where my mother and I fed sparrows the fine crumbed bread from our table. They seemed to know us, our discomfort, how the silence that followed each start displaced the easy morning like a drop of water in oil. They were unblinking, heads cocked and waiting for a tail. I read once that birds tilt their heads to orient themselves within the architecture of sound. Perhaps this has been my problem all along, no ready answer to the question of impetus, of plot. All morning we wandered unpredictable streets, and in the Tuileries I collapsed against a painted carousel horse and finally smiled. I wanted to tell you that I ached, just ached for it to be about this, the picture my mother later taped to the fridge of me there, my circular laughter and amaranth dress, or the late sky over the river, or the light shattering itself around the watery spire of Notre Dame. Paris will always be about my mother and me, though she will rewrite this story over and over. Your art is your art, she will say. It is whatever you need it to be. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't understand what stories can hold or what they foreclose. Hunger at the Louvre, or street lamps casting erratic shadows, or my mother crying that I don't know how to love. Above the table in the gallery cafe, a flag sighs in fitful declination. It shakes off story after story. The story is never enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanie. Our final reader today is Barbara Swan. She has lived in Miami since the age of 6 and is an unwilling graduate of the Florida International University's MFA program, where she had hoped to continue as a student for life. And I've been given permission to say that as of this week, she's also the newest adjunct faculty member in English at Broward College. Please welcome Barb Swan.
I do everything I can to avoid reading out loud or sending anything out to get published. So thank you, though. This has been the most extraordinary experience of my life, being part of all of you. Father's Day. From the time my parents got divorced, I did my best to have my dad over once a year on Father's Day. 10 years after the split, when he was 80, he and his 39-year-old wife, whose name I can't recall, showed up late for Sunday brunch in separate cars. They were polite to me, but not really speaking to each other. Actually, my father was pretty damn quiet, which was unusual and unnerving, like watching a performance of a symphony without sound. By the age of 10, I'd learned not to ask personal questions because I already knew I wouldn't want to know the answers. So we talk about Demosthenes or Jean-Paul Sartre or Pablo Neruda. But my live-in boyfriend, Philip, Sicilian, couldn't bear the silence or the lack of what he considered normal familial curiosity and asked, "Why didn't you two come together?" Michelle or Mary or Marcy replied, "Because our divorce was final on Friday." For a while, the only sound was careful, closed-mouth smacking. But then again, Philip simply had to know. "Why? What happened?" She shrugged. "I was tired of his cheating." I said, "Pass the cream cheese, please." I watched the afternoon sun make its way across the room and stretch like a cat on the dining room table. And then my father's voice suddenly filled the Sunday silence. "It's time for you to know you're not an only child." All those years I worked for Sharp and traveled each month to Asia. I met someone Taiwanese and had 3 kids. But that never meant I didn't love you and your mother. Philip choked and blurted, "What?" I reached out my hand and said, "Please pass the smoked salmon." As the light began to fade, my father seemed to shrink like an immense Macy's Day balloon, which had forever blocked the view of the sky and stars, and which time had finally stuck a pin. My dad died 12 years later, choking on lunch, which was ironic since he was a health nut and always said food can kill you. It happened to be my birthday, and for once he was alone because his new 32-year-old Korean wife was shopping. Now I often think about those siblings in far-off China and wonder how much they look like me. And I do. Gorgon. My head is going to explode from the weight of the snakes writhing and undulating by belly dancers at an assassin's convention. Angelica, the frozen butter blonde sniggers with her silly sisters in the dirty socks and old blood-smelling locker room. My world is full of prissy, jealous virgins with flat asses and pimply-faced boys who dream of me the way men dream of slaying dragons. I walk the halls alone. On genius. We all want to be one until the suffering sets in. Aeries and mountain caves are for eagles and monks. Scientists will tell you that love manufactures the identical chemicals in the brain as psychosis. So do poetry and crystal meth. Two more. Reasons why it all makes sense now, or doesn't. Because the Borgias were Spaniards. Because it took forever to get from 9 to 10 years old. Because ultimately it's not fair. Because you were right, no one liked you. Bees die for what they protect. Because the Magna Carta was an English concept. Because men are just people. Because greedy idiots and madmen are the only ones who want to run the world. Because intelligent alien life mated with Earth's apes. Because alcohol is legal and weed mostly isn't. Because parents are just people who have absolutely no idea what they are doing. Because most Jews could read. Because everyone hates middle school. Because we have all confused love and obsession. Because war is most often economically sound. Because at some point igniting becomes self-immolation. Because there is no master plan. Because seasons change and the breeze smells of salt and jasmine. And lastly, koan. There was a spoon melted in the heat of the sun and hardened by the smoke of remorse. There was a sunrise like a pair of scissors that cut into the flesh of the moon. There was an impatient night lit by their lust, and her toenails washed silver by stars. There was a tree flying by, propelled by the wind, and the dreams of a boy lost in red. There was a harvest of tears shed by a shoe, and a slipper that danced on alone.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you to all of our readers and all of our audience members. Please stay around, maybe buy a book, have it signed, eat something, drink something. And if you are free, on Thursday, October 20th, we have our first visiting writer event at the FIU Biscayne Bay campus. Our guest is Rigoberto Gonzalez, a multi-genre writer of 20 books. We'd love for you to come. There's something for everyone. It starts at 8 p.m. Thank you so much.
All right, so as Julie mentioned, we will be having the reception at the table there at the back of the room. We have these two tables for all of our readers today to be signing from. Everyone's books are for sale at the counter, so I want to thank our host this afternoon, Julie Marie Wade. I want to thank our gray eminence, Les Standiford. And this was another wonderful reading. Please give another hand to all of our readers here today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.